This is tracking internet noise to reduce alerts and predict attacks. Again, I'm Andrew Morris. I'm the founder and CEO of GreyNoise. I'm super excited to be joined here by Rob. And let's see. So I'm just going to jump right in. So the routable internet is 4.2 billion IP addresses. That's just IPv4. Then there's also IPv6. The internet's big. And back in the day, a long time ago, the way the bad guys used to do stuff is they would just, scan their target network and then they would try to find vulnerabilities. And then if they found any vulnerabilities, they would try to exploit those vulnerabilities. And then they would get into your network and they would do all kinds of bad stuff. Now, actually, the paradigm's kind of changed. We're at the point now where good guys, bad guys, et cetera, are scanning and crawling the entire internet all the time, 24/7, looking for a handful of alerts or many alerts. Looking for a handful of vulnerabilities or many vulnerabilities. This has created a noise problem. So now the internet is super noisy. People are scanning and crawling and attacking the internet all the time, every routable host on the entire internet. Now, this creates a ton of not only, scan traffic, but it creates security alerts as well. And those security alerts, IDS alerts, et cetera, those are actually causing both, a lot of distractions, but also just a lot of wasted time to security analysts who really want to just get to the stuff that matters the most. And they're having a hard time doing that. We've got some stats here in front of you of basically just the amount of alerts that, the people are triaging in the SOC across the industry that end up becoming, ticketed as false positive. A lot of alerts get to that point. A lot of analysts get to the point where they say, like, look, if the queue is full, like, I'm just going to end up having to drop a bunch of stuff, right? And I just can't get to all this stuff eventually. And it's really just tremendously frustrating to try to derive value in a lot of security operations centers from the alerts that are happening, because not only are there a zillion security products that are telling you a zillion different things, but also the internet is just super noisy, and it's really hard to try to actually derive meaningful signal from the alerts that they're looking at. Not only this, but there are also a tremendous amount of new vulnerabilities that are kind of constantly coming out or being published or being disclosed, rather, generally in all kinds of software, but a lot of the times in software or services that are internet facing. So basically, we've seen, especially recently this past year, that a tremendous amount of vulnerabilities in remote access software or enterprise communication software are being disclosed that are being used by a lot of people. And the amount of time has in between a vulnerability being kind of publicly acknowledged or publicly disclosed and a proof of concept being published, or an actual exploit being written and made public, that amount of time has shrunk down quite a bit. So now the amount of, to make matters worse, if you're doing vulnerability management, or if you're part of the IT or the ops team, then trying to figure out which vulnerabilities you need to do something about is really difficult, because it seems like everything is kind of on fire all the time, and tons of new vulnerabilities are always being published, and it just makes it really difficult, right? So just to drive this point across a little bit more, at least on internet noise and internet scanning, this is a quick clip of, this is just a quick bar graph of the amount of noise that has been seen by GreyNoise collector nodes over time over the last 30 days. So this is the network that we're operating. We're seeing hundreds of millions of unsolicited packets that are hitting our network on a daily basis. And so you can see here, sometimes the noise that spikes up quite a bit, sometimes it's a little bit quieter, but this isn't even just the noise for the entire internet. This is just what we've observed directly firsthand. I'm going to get into the mechanics of exactly how we do that here a little bit later. This is a quick breakdown of exactly what I mean when I'm talking about internet scanning or internet noise. You can see on the left, there's some really obvious patterns, right? You can see, like, obviously bad guys, et cetera, are going to be scanning for services or port numbers that have services that are interesting or valuable to them, right? That they can use to do something interesting, like log into a machine or compromise a device or brute force credentials or, or something like that. Then on the right, you can actually see some patterns here of the RDNS domains of a lot of the places that are sending this massive amount of noise. You can even see here, there's some obvious hosting providers that jump out at you, like DigitalOcean, IP Volume, etc. Then up above, you can even see like, okay, like Census.io, which is a security company that, that maps out and scans and crawls the internet. So that actually checks out with, your understanding of like who is scanning the internet, right? Let's see. So then next, like when you're thinking about, okay, so bad guys are scanning the internet, but also good guys and researchers are scanning the internet, which is, it's really valuable. It's a really valuable service that these organizations are providing, but it is indeed contributing to this internet noise problem, right? Every time another one of these companies comes up, and every time somebody else realizes that scanning the internet can be an interesting, useful bit of data, another company goes up and realizes like, hey, I can scan the internet. Well, it's easier for me to scan the internet if I do it from 1,000 places and if I shift where we're doing it from all the time. So that's actually making the noise problem even worse. And a lot of the time, when you're just looking at logs or when you're looking at network traffic that's hitting your network, you're going to be seeing, like vulnerability probes and vulnerability checks. And it's really hard to distinguish, like, who's doing this? And is this hitting just me specifically? Or is this like Shodan? Or is this like a botnet? Or who is this? And the security companies are not always, completely straightforward to distinguish from a bad guy who's actually knocking on your door and trying to exploit your network. Another phenomenon that we've actually observed over the last period of time, over the last couple of weeks, is this idea that we call noise storms, which is just periodically there are mysteriously just massive spikes of spoofed SYN traffic will actually blast on the entire internet that is clearly not coming from the actual advertised source IP addresses, and it really is like very noisy when you see this stuff start to happen. We have like a quick chart here of a couple times where we've seen like very large upticks in the amount of scan traffic that is hitting the internet at a given time. So what can we learn from this, right? What can we learn from this data? Well, one thing that we found is the Pulse Secure vulnerability that was announced. Let's see, there have been several, but there was one last year, and I know that there's been a resurgence of it this year. Pulse Secure, operates a VPN service, a remote access service, and some vulnerabilities were discovered in it. And there were some news bulletins and some different organizations published like, hey, there's a known vulnerability in Pulse Secure, and you should patch this immediately. We very quickly at GreyNoise, we identified an unknown actor and different bad guys that were attempting to opportunistically exploit hosts on the internet for this Pulse Secure vulnerability at scale, almost immediately, like within days of this actually occurring. And so we turned around, we wrote an analytic for this, and we made this available to people. And if you're in, if you've been in the security industry for any more than, any period of time, you also have experienced this, where a vulnerability is announced by a vendor or by one of the different security organizations or security certs or a security company, and a vulnerability is announced, and then everybody starts scanning for it, and everybody is saying that there's a lot of noise around whether or not anybody's exploiting it or not, or whether it matters. And so this was just one example of this happening earlier this year, but we have seen really a tremendous amount of these vulnerabilities in particular in remote access software and common enterprise software. And Pulse Secure was one of those that we saw earlier last year. We actually saw a really interesting large spike in people scanning and crawling the internet right before DEF CON, like 2 weeks ago. And what's interesting about this is it was actually pretty flat before that. After the vulnerability was disclosed about a year ago, we saw like a big uptick, and then it went quiet again, and now we've seen like a base floor and then really big spike again recently. I mean, we have no idea why, but we have indeed seen a very large spike in people that are scanning and crawling the internet for Pulse Secure devices yet again. Another example would be last year there was a pretty bad, scary vulnerability in F5s, in F5 big IPs, the load balancers. And so this vulnerability was disclosed last year, and we very quickly started seeing from a handful of devices around the internet, we started seeing a handful of IPs that were like quietly probing lots of devices on the internet to see if they were vulnerable to the F5 big IP vulnerability that had been announced. So that was a really interesting data point, because we could actually say, oh, great, like this is, we do know that there are people out there that are trying to collect information or collect data on hosts at scale to try to figure out whether or not they're vulnerable, so that we can, either report them or come back and exploit them. Unclear. We saw here is a timeline of people who were scanning and crawling and exploiting hosts opportunistically on the internet looking for F5s. And this was actually pretty interesting. You can see here that in April of this year, the scanning really, really ticked down massively. Now, that could mean one of a few different things. That means that the actor who was doing the vast, lion's share of this scanning just decided to stop. It could be that it was no longer valuable for them to do it. It could be that hosts started getting patched too quickly and it didn't make any more sense. It could be that there was some kind of takedown. It could be that there was a disruption. And it could just be that naturally they just decided to move on to another target, right? Or another type of software. But we did see this like wind down in a big way. It doesn't mean that the internet is any less, it doesn't mean that you're any, any safer if you're still vulnerable to this particular vulnerability. But it does mean that, bad guys are not aggressively going after hosts that are running the software that may be vulnerable to this anymore. So you're less likely to get opportunistically compromised, but you're just as likely to get compromised by a targeted attacker. We also saw a VMware vSphere vulnerability that came out earlier this year, and that vulnerability was really interesting because it was definitely the same day that the news hit, where somebody announced this vulnerability, and we were immediately seeing people that were scanning and crawling the internet looking for hosts that were vulnerable to this. I'm sure it was some combination of security companies and bad guys, but it's still really interesting because this was a piece of software that lots and lots of people were running, and I know that everybody was really freaked out about this particular vulnerability. Obviously, Microsoft Exchange had a vulnerability that was published recently. This is, again, another piece of software that is like very commonly running on the internet, very commonly running on enterprise networks, and definitely running on a lot of networks that would pose a lot of attacker value or intelligence value to bad guys, nation states, etc. So this was another one that as soon as we saw this vulnerability announced, we were able to watch the ramp up occur of bad guys that were attempting to exploit this vulnerability or probe for the existence of this vulnerability very, very quickly. We actually we have some correlation, a correlation data point of something that we were observing, where basically we were seeing EHLO, mail negotiation protocol. We were seeing those spike up and down, both when during proxy logon, when people were clearly trying to use mail server to figure out whether or not what people were running on the internet, and then even again when something similar happened here recently. Bluekeep was a interesting case study for us as well. If you recall, Bluekeep was a vulnerability in Microsoft RDP, or Remote Desktop Protocol, and RDP is a super common protocol that's used by a lot of people on a lot of enterprise networks. And so the vulnerability was disclosed, Microsoft announced it, and we saw a slower ramp up on this one because this one was really difficult to exploit initially. There was some complexity around exploitation. And so it wasn't an immediate thing, but we did start to slowly and steadily see vulnerability checks or vulnerability probes and exploitations start increasing within a few weeks of the announcement of the vulnerability. And this one was really interesting as well. So how can GreyNoise help with this super noisy internet problem and with the problem of opportunistic exploitation on the internet? So with GreyNoise, you can really, it's kind of like noise canceling headphones for your existing security products, or just a higher signal indicator of a vulnerability being exploited. So with GreyNoise, you can filter out a bunch of noise of who's scanning and crawling the entire internet, and you have a much cleaner way to identify opportunistic exploitation of a given vulnerability with very, very high confidence. If GreyNoise is seeing something that's happening at large scale, that means that it affects you. So the way that GreyNoise works is that we operate a gigantic network of these passive collector sensors. They're kind of like honeypots. They're sitting in hundreds of data centers in dozens of countries, in tons of different hosting providers all around the world. We are collecting all this data from a ton of different places, and all these hosts don't have any business value. That means that we're not borrowing data from people's networks. We're not, running taps on internet service providers. We are operating these sensors ourselves in different corners of the internet so that we get a really clean signal of who is scanning, crawling, attacking everybody on the entire internet. So we can see people who are scanning and crawling the internet. We take all of that data, we stream it into one central place. We enrich that data with a bunch of enrichments. We analyze that data. That's what our research team does all day, every day, is write analytics and tags on the data so that it's more transparent, it's more explainable, and it's more contextualized. And we tag that data with different tags and analytics that have classifications, that have implications, that are sort of characterized, that basically tell more of a story about, okay, first of all, obviously this IP address is scanning and crawling the internet, but what are they scanning for? How long have they been doing it? Is it associated with any known security companies? Is it associated with any known bad guys? If it's bad, how do you know it's bad? What was it doing that made GreyNoise say that it was bad? Was it brute forcing something? Did it throw an exploit? If it threw an exploit, what kind of exploit did it throw, right? So that's the way that our technology works. We do all of this analysis. We put everything into a data store, and we have an API that communicates with a bunch of different integrations and security products that you're already using. So I'm going to pull that up here in a second. The three most common use cases that people use GreyNoise for is, first and foremost, increasing analyst efficiency. So because we have this fantastic understanding that's always updating of everyone who is scanning and crawling the internet, we're able to basically compare that with what your network is seeing. And anything that is both in GreyNoise and hitting your network, that means that that's things that are hitting everybody on the entire internet. Anything that's in your network and that doesn't show up in GreyNoise, that means that it's targeted towards you specifically, or at least it's targeted in some capacity other than just hitting the entire internet. It's macro targeted. It's not something that's blasting the entire internet. So as a security analyst, if you're able to, let's say you have 1,000 alerts and there's no way that you're going to be able to triage all of those alerts. You've got to drop off, some chunk of them. You've got to triage some of them as quickly as you can to be able to figure out the ones that really matter to you the most. You can use GreyNoise to really quickly figure out, hey, which of these are just hitting me versus which of these are just noise. It's just stuff that's hitting everybody on the entire internet. So using GreyNoise, we can make any security operations center noticeably more efficient. The second use case that we have in here is identification of compromised systems. So as a byproduct of all of this internet background noise data that we're collecting, we actually know where a bunch of compromised systems are, because as we started tagging and contextualizing the data more and more, we started to realize, like, wow, a lot of this data is actually being generated by devices that have been infected with malware, devices that are parts of botnets that are trying to spread, that are trying to compromise more hosts. And so we've actually, we've built such an understanding of our corpus of data that we see probably anywhere from kind of 50 to 100,000 compromised devices every day. Now, these devices are probably, the way that we know that they're infected is because they're doing things that only an infected host would do, right? They're attempting to brute force credentials on a couple of different services on one or more of our collector nodes, right? So we can, with pretty high fidelity, determine when a device is compromised because of the behavior that we're watching it exhibit. Finally, uncovering information about emerging threats. Like I mentioned, there is a lot of ambiguity around vulnerabilities that have been recently announced, and everybody always asks the same question: how much do I actually have to care about this thing, right? How scary is this? How big of a deal is this, right? And that can be really hard to answer. There's a lot of different ways that you can slice and dice, like how much you care about a given vulnerability. But one very strong data point on whether or not, or how soon you have to care about a given vulnerability, is based on how long it takes for a bad guy to start opportunistically exploiting that vulnerability, or when it happens, right? There is a difference between a vulnerability being announced and you saying, okay, well, I will obviously patch this as soon as I possibly can, but I've got all these other things that are a bigger deal, versus, a hard data point of, look, bad guys are attempting to exploit this thing at internet scale right now. And so we are able to provide that data for different vulnerabilities, and we're always adding support for new vulnerabilities that we can tell our customers about, so that they can not only say, okay, is this vulnerability being opportunistically exploited on the internet, yes or no? But then once the answer is yes, okay, from where, right? Who is exploiting this thing on the internet? Because then you can look to see, like, okay, first of all, have those IP addresses ever talked to my network? Probably. Second of all, can I block these? Is there anything that I can do to buy myself a little bit of time, etc. And so we do provide this data, which helps prioritization, and it's a good, strong data point for, you don't always want to be smashing the glass over at the, in the ops team, telling them, hey, this is a super emergency. But sometimes, it is kind of an emergency. And so we really hope to provide more color and context around that with different vulnerabilities with that third use case. I've just got a couple of quick data points in here that just basically cover, the rough volume of alerts that we're able to contextualize on our customers' networks. A good network that is actually pretty common, or a good figure that is pretty common with our customers, about 25%. That number really depends on quite a few factors, like architecturally, like where are you enriching data from? How mature is the SOC? How much work on, getting rid of false positives and noisy alerts have you already done before you've, dropped in our integrations, etc. And finally, so as I mentioned before, the way that GreyNoise works is that we collect all this data from a bunch of different places all around the internet. We process it, we stream it to a place, we enrich it, we analyze it, we do a bunch of analytics on it, and then we put all the data into a bunch of data stores. We have an API that talks to those data stores, and then we have a bunch of integrations that are used by the security products that fit into the security products that you're already using, right? So we believe that the best way to provide the most value to our users and our customers with the least amount of friction humanly possible is to just integrate with the tools that they're already using, right? The way that it makes the most sense, we don't want to give everybody like an entirely new set of tools. Security analysts have, generally speaking, figured out workflows that work for them and their team and their network. And so that's why, it makes more sense for us to just, build on top of that and get the data to analysts in the tools that they're using, so there is as little friction as possible. So we're really just kind of augmenting the way that they're already doing things. I have a quick customer list here. We've got, let's see, 7 of our flagship customers in here, and then we've got about 70 more that we don't have listed in the slide. Quick quote from Steve over at Hurricane Labs. Hurricane Labs is one of our first customers. They've been with us for a long time, and I've really loved working with them. So they were one of the first customers, and they immediately saw the value. And the 25% number came from them, and that's something that I'm just really excited about. So with that, I am actually just going to pull over and do a quick demo of our web interface. So here, I am just at greynoise.io. I am logged in with functionally a free account. We have our marketing website right here. We have our GNQL query box up here at the top. And here in this box, I can basically type in GNQL query, which stands for GreyNoise Query Language. So this actually supports one of a number of different facets. But the first thing that I'm going to show you is basically just, let me see everybody who's scanning and crawling the internet in the last day. So in the last day, GreyNoise has firsthand seen 225,000 distinct IP addresses that are scanning and crawling the internet. Now let's see, we've done last seen 1 day, Now I've got the list of the individual IP addresses and the organizations that their networks belong to, as well as a small summary of the tags or the behaviors that we've observed them doing, what country they're in, and then a few other little data points over here. We have aggregates on the left side, and let's see, we can see the top countries, the classification breakdown. So you can see of the devices that are scanning and crawling the internet right now, about half of them are unknown classification, which means, look, we just don't have enough information to tell you if it's good or bad. We know that it's scanning and crawling the internet, but we don't know if it's something that is, has malicious intent or if it's just a security company. Malicious means, look, we've seen this IP address doing something that is, it's not something that you do on a system that belongs to you. It's it's malicious. They're trying to compromise it. They're brute forcing it, etc. And then benign is, look, they're following all the rules. They're basically advertising who they are, where they're coming from. Whether that's in an RDNS pointer or a user agent or on a web page, they're offering you an opt-out page, etc. And then we've got a number of other different aggregates over here on the left, and I'm not going to go through each and every one of those. But for right now, let's see, I can actually drill into really any of these and find one that looks kind of interesting. And again, if you guys want to follow along, if you see this right now, just go to GreyNoise.io. You can start making queries right now. After you do, I don't know, some number of queries, it is going to prompt you to create a free account. And so once you hit that rate limit, just create a free account. You can keep on using it. So I've drilled down to this IP address. You can see that this IP address is classified as malicious. Why is it classified as malicious? Well, it is because it's been brute forcing IoT credentials. It exhibits Mirai behavior, and it's been brute forcing Telnet. Great. So now if I see this IP address, and this IP address is scanning and crawling, it's hitting my network, what I know is, all right, this IP address is bad and it is attacking me, but it's not attacking me specifically. It's actually attacking hosts on the internet, just everybody trying to spread. We can see here that it's scanning the internet for these 3 ports. We know this because it talked to our collector nodes on these 3 ports. We can also see that it's crawling the internet for just the root path. So it's using these 4 different user agents. So it's pretty interesting here. So now the next thing I'm going to show you is, you can actually pivot on all of these if you want to click through the web interface. Let's see, I want to go to Mirai. I click that. This is just every IP address that we have tagged with the Mirai tag. You can also do filtered queries right here from this main menu. So I can say, all right, well, I have the Mirai tag. What about Mirai in Russia? So then I click Russia. And now I've got another view of IP addresses that are scanning and crawling the internet that have communicated with GreyNoise collector nodes, but that are also located in Russia. So now I'm actually just going to quickly show you, well, what would it look like if you looked up an IP address in GreyNoise and it was scanning and crawling the internet, but it was one of the good guys. So now I did classification benign, and this is really interesting. So now look, we've got we've got Census, Alpha Strike Labs, Cyber Casa, Stretchoid IP, etc. Got a ton of different known benign IP addresses. So these you would look up and you would really see something that is more, it's something that is obviously like here, this is an IP address that belongs to Census. And look, we say, hey, this belongs to Census. The organization network owner is Census. Look, you see this scanning and crawling your network. This is not something that you have to care about, right? This is an IP address that belongs to Census, and you can look Census up, but they're a known benign security company. They are not attacking you. Disregard it, right? And so we provide all this context right in here. And again, all this exact same data that I'm looking at right now is available in all of our different integrations. So this web interface right here uses the exact same APIs that all of our different integrations use. That means I could look this same thing up in the command line, directly in the API, or using something like Splunk or any of the different SIMs or SOAR technologies that people are using. Beyond this, I can just really quickly show you, well, what if I wanted to try to use GreyNoise to identify compromised devices, right? I could do just a really simple GNQL query. I'll say last seen in the last week. Let's say I am the network administrator or a security analyst or a trust and safety analyst for Comcast, right? So I could then say last seen 1 week, classification malicious, and then I could type org Comcast, right? So now I've actually I've filtered this down to devices that are located in Comcast, in a network that belongs to Comcast, that are classification malicious, that have been active over the last week. So I found this, if I wanted to just really quickly create an alert for this, I could go here to create alert. I could type in that exact same query that I just put. I put in my email address and do this. And I've now got an alert that will fire off if any new things come into that CIDR block that I just looked up. And so basically that's just a really quick tour of how to use GreyNoise, how to do lookups. We have an analysis page that you can use to do free text dump in, like you can dump in free text and we'll parse everything out. I just parsed a bunch of data in here. It extracted all of this data so that you can see like, okay, well, we enriched all of this. I can see any IP addresses that are, that are noise, and any that aren't, I can export this data right back out, etc. And then finally, I'll just show you quickly the tags page. This is a page where we basically just have all of the different analytics that we collect. And so this is, you can see we have hundreds of these that we're constantly adding to IP addresses who are scanning and crawling the internet. All of this data is available in all the different integrations that I mentioned before. So the real magic is using GreyNoise to very quickly, help you get to know faster, get to this doesn't matter faster, and get to, what is this doing and do I have to care about it right now? If something is in GreyNoise, that means that it's hitting everybody on the entire internet, and it may not be, it may not be the first thing that you're going to want to look at. You're probably going to want to pay more attention to the things that are hitting, your network specifically. Let's see, and that's really it. This web interface is publicly accessible. Anybody can go and create an account anytime.
It's fun. This is the first one of these I've done where I looked at your URL, I threw it over in the screen. I was like, oh, I can literally follow along and start going through it. So that's pretty good. And also it kind of goes to the time to value discussion. That's pretty fast for anybody to just pivot around themselves and go, yeah, this is going to be useful for me. So I was curious, before we jump in on the questions and all, there's a lot of good stuff here and a lot that I want to dig into. A couple places my mind's going. One is on the ASNs. So I started pivoting around in just the ASNs to see what you had and how it was tagged. And I usually talk about ASNs a lot in the Intel class, just because there's some that are historically more malicious than others. Quite a bit of internet spam comes from just a very few number of ASNs. And then, of course, when you look at kind of BGP level things, there's always some interesting activity that takes place between states. So I guess before I get more specific, it just kind of open-ended for you on like what's been some of the interesting observations for y'all with the ASNs and the data set, because there should be a couple different places you can go off that would be kind of fun.
Oh yeah. So the first thing that jumps to mind, Rob, is that there are some bad neighborhoods on the internet. And everybody knows that in their heart. Everybody knows that in their gut. Everybody who's been a security analyst for any period of time, eventually you see the same ASN a certain number of times and you're like, what are they doing over here? We actually have the data to classify, like empirically, which ASNs are the most open to basically have the fewest scruples with ignoring the most abuse complaint reports that they're going to receive. And we can actually derive that just from looking at our ASN data. And we can see that, especially because what's really interesting about that is that obviously a larger ASN is going to have more abuse just because it has more IP addresses, right? But if you actually do the math down to like, okay, what about how many compromised devices or just not compromised, but malicious devices for every like 100 or 1,000 IP addresses in an ASN? You shrink that down, that gives you a really, really interesting picture of like the most dangerous places on the internet. Does that make sense?
Yeah. That's fun. It usually leads to people in class being like, oh, so I should just block certain ASNs, right? I'm like, that's not necessarily what I'm saying, but you should pay attention to it.
Right.
Unless you have that, if you're mom and pop, in Wisconsin or something kind of shop, maybe, but for the most part, maybe not. No, I love the malicious classification here.
Yeah, so I just did last seen 1 week classification malicious. And if I go over here, these 5 are the ones that have the most badness. You've got 4837, 4134, etc. Yeah, look, again, this isn't an indictment of
some of those are numbers. Yeah, some of those are numbers you'll memorize in your career. So yeah, no, that's good stuff. Fun. All right, so look, the other one is like, I don't know that you guys do this, so this is kind of an left field question, but you told me ahead of time, sure. You could take all the crazy ones.
You can ask me absolutely anything you want. Yeah, let's do it.
So it's an obvious data set that's very, very valuable, and I'm just thinking like how I think about the world, and I care a lot more about like industrial companies than banks, as an example. Everybody's, path in life is great, but that's my focus. And so what I was thinking is, you mentioned, hey, if it's not hitting everybody else, then it's more targeted towards you. I think about more targeted towards industries. And my question is, where you all obviously have a good data set, are you doing anything, or do you have anything, without any sort of spoiler alerts, on kind of the theming of some of these locations where you could start to derive more, hey, this is background noise, but also here's stuff we're seeing that if you have anything related to energy, these kind of hot spots are popping up, and kind of doing that cross correlation yourself versus depending on the customer doing it themselves. So obviously it's very valuable to the customer on one hand, but that kind of cross correlation at your level of the theming of infrastructure and similar would be really interesting research for your analysts, I'd imagine.
Yeah. So the short answer is that I agree with you 100% that it would be incredibly valuable. We don't have that exposed to our users or to our customers yet, but that is on our roadmap.
I love that.
The way that I think it will make sense is, I would really like to tell people when they have asked us a question that there are a few ways that you can slice it and dice it, but I would love to tell our users or our customers when they ask us a question that several other organizations in their same vertical asked us about, and we either do or do not know anything about it, because that is a valuable signal in and of itself. I can't tell you how many times we've been looking at the data and we've been like, oh my God, I don't know if these organizations know, but they're all looking up the same thing and they all work in the same vertical. So I know that that is tremendously valuable, but I don't want to take that feature to our users or customers in a way that like freaks them out that we're like,
not only that, but
or anything like that.
There's massive adversarial value of that too.
Right, exactly.
So no, that to me, look, I'm not trying to tell you how to run your company, but that to me, from a community perspective, ought to be a paid feature.
That's not one of the we would want to just throw around all willy-nilly.
That ought to be like, you got to have a credit card and a known identity to get this. But that would be a lot of fun, man.
Exactly.
And I think a lot about that of like, it's an implication potentially of targeting. And as we go through and do intrusion analysis, one of the main things you always want to get to is, hey, is this targeted me or everybody? And so we're already doing that one, but is it targeted towards me or my industry? And having that industry insight, super, super useful. So yeah, that's fun. I'm glad y'all are doing it.
Yeah, awesome. Targeting and targetedness is a spectrum, right? Because I think there is, all the way from the name of an individual to just someone who works at this company to a company that does this kind of thing. And so I do think that there's a lot of value in telling people like, look, this thing's hitting you. It's not hitting the entire internet, but we definitely know that it's hitting other members of your vertical, and we just wanted to let you know.
In the same way, because you already have like ports and similar. Are you thinking about doing sort of protocol stuff where it's like, hey, I immediately go to industrial, but like, hey, here's like an industrial control system kind of info gathering type work.
So we've got a few.
Look at you.
Look at you. We've got a few ICS tags in here, so I'm gonna go to our tags page.
I wouldn't expect any. I'll be surprised if you have any. But
we do. We have Tritium, Niagara, AX.
Yeah, it's a building automation system that's like everywhere on the internet, and it should not be. So being able to see, and I'm not surprised to see the first name pop up being Alpha Strike, like literally, like that's cool, because like I start digging in and going, okay, well, again, scanning for banners on a server, everybody does that. It's a little level down on that targeting spectrum, right? Of I know exactly what I'm looking for, and a little further down and it's these certain industrial vendors that you'd have to know a little bit about to go after. So I don't know, maybe after the webcast, I'll start pinging you and taking a look at some stuff. Anyways.
Yeah. Check this out. You're gonna like this. So I just looked up this tag. I know we have more of these tags, but I think that we're revisiting them right now, because I think I wrote the original tags for a lot of these, and then we hired out our research team, and they're way better at this than me. So they saw the analytics I wrote, and they're like, "This is
like when John and Justin, my co-founders, and I were like building the original like GreyNoise application. We're like, this is great, and then we hired like professionals. I'm like, oh my god, we sucked.
Yeah, that's exactly how I feel. So I'm gonna do this one because this one they've redone, and then I'm actually gonna subtract anything that has classification benign.
Yeah.
So this is really interesting because now I
Yeah.
filtered out Alpha Strike, I filtered out Shodan and Census.
Hey, look,
These,
that's a familiar institute. Yeah, no, this is fun. Yeah.
yeah, so this data
Okay.
is incredibly valuable,
Yeah, I mean
you know,
again, just very quickly, I can tell you like it's super interesting. So we'll have to geek out a little
yeah,
bit later. But look, there's a lot of questions over here, so I probably should get you to the folks that
okay,
actually
yeah,
tuned
let's
into the
do it, let's do
webinar.
it.
All right, perfect. One, apparently there's somebody that knows you too of like Heck. It's Hector, but he's like, hey man, it's Heck. Anyways, it's been a pleasure seeing you grow GreyNoise from a concept to what it is now. My question, with all the data you've been able to parse, has this allowed you to build out methodologies or MOs for different groups or regions or kind of states? Can you share maybe the most interesting insights of like the groups, tools, techniques, things you've seen in the wild?
Oh, that's really interesting. That's a great question. Um, I would say definitely the pattern of scanning and crawling the internet through Tor, but in a way that like, so there are tooling fingerprints that make their way all the way to us. And that would be like, TLS fingerprints, SSH fingerprints, like protocol fingerprints, right? And even when you go through Tor, there's going to be ways that you're going to that we're going to know what the original like code was that generated that. There's some actor out there who scans and crawls the internet through Tor, but from Cobalt Strike. So it's like from them to Cobalt Strike to Tor to our collectors and the entire internet, and they will check if it's a honeypot before they do anything by basically issuing like some nonsense. And it's so interesting because that's one of the only groups that I've ever seen that like that is really good. They really know what they're doing. I would speculate. I mean, I think I know what group it might be based on just some stuff that I've read, but I don't want to speculate because honestly, there's a good
It's
chance that I'm
just
wrong.
Mudge drunk in his basement. No.
Really could be. There's this like crazy phenomenon that we've seen of basically first and second stage where there's like this basically the internet looks just the way people there's groups out there that scan the internet. They do the first stage. They have like the loud part where they do the loud scanning from one place, then they do the quiet or follow-up scanning from another place, and then they do like the really complicated stuff from a third place. And it's these like massive distributed systems that have clearly had some like really thoughtful engineering.
There
um
used to be only one that I could think of that did that. Now it's more common, yeah. So that's
yeah, because the tooling has come a really long way between them, and there have even I've even seen devices that when you or groups who will you know basically offload their targeting to the benign one, like to the like they'll offload their targeting in the first pass of scanning to like these different services, like the different security companies, and they'll go after people from there so that they don't have to risk tripping honeypots. But there's still ways that we can fool that. So I mean, there's a lot of different interesting things like that I've
no,
seen.
that's cool.
I just
Yeah,
basically waxed
that's a good
poetic. I
like
didn't really
research
answer that
paper or
question at all.
something. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
a good kind of thing to dig into. Or partnering up with like a CTI company and kind of following into the later stages and trying to connect everything together would be
exactly.
all these wonderful like research if we all had time kind of things. But yeah, all right,
Yeah.
perfect. So the
Shout
next
out
question
Hector.
here, yeah, yeah. The next question is here is kind of when you talk about true positives and false positives with malicious IPs versus benign and so forth that you're tagging, kind of what is your expected true positive rate, or kind of what are you guys holding yourselves to in terms of what you'd like to see in the true positive rates for the malicious tagging?
Oh yeah. So like, I mean, for us, I want to see like 99.999% true positive rate for malicious, because that's one of those things that just from our angle, like I don't want to be wrong about that one, like ever, because I think that it can reduce people's faith in our data. So like we really scrutinize our tags like really, really aggressively so that we don't accidentally classify things incorrectly. I would way rather tag half as much stuff as malicious, but have it be 99.999% accurate than tag twice as many things and be like 80% or 90% accurate. Like
Yeah,
I want to be right
I think
all
that's
the
the right call. Yeah, I think that's
time.
absolutely the right call. All right, perfect. So next one here. Uh,
Yeah.
Yeah, next one's what are some things you and the team have found fun with the incidental collection that GreyNoise has? As an example, what might not help a client, but you just found interesting?
Oh God, I could talk about this for so long. Um, so like we can see when people like screw their tools up. So when people who are scanning and crawling the internet like misconfigure something and do like really dumb things at like massive scale, like misspell the user agent field, like with a typo. That is always funny. We'll see people that'll like they'll use POCs that are broken, but at massive internet scale. So like we'll see them doing it from like their huge botnet, but we know that it's not
Send it.
working anywhere. Yeah. And it's not working anywhere. And we know that because we'll see like a typo or like a missing format string everywhere. And we're like, okay, this is hilarious. I've had times where we've seen like people that have accidentally left they've accidentally quoted um, like they basically quoted a variable that was supposed to be like random user agent, and they've literally written like random user agent. I'm like, okay, well, come on. We've seen like dangling DNS pointers, like because we shift our infrastructure constantly. Sometimes we'll inherit an IP address that used to belong to like a blog or something, and
Uh,
so then like all of a sudden it's like we have an IP address that's like, joshsblog.com. And we're like, shit, we have to tear that down, and we have to stand it back up because it poisons our data set. So stuff like that we think is like wildly interesting. As well as, I mean, I would even just add like whenever an authoritarian government cuts off the internet anywhere, the internet background noise that is in that country just goes completely silent. And that's just one of those things that's like always really interesting to me, that like even such a esoteric symbol or an esoteric signal you can use to find when people are shutting off the internet. Granted, there's 1,000 better ways to figure that out, but it is really interesting.
yeah, it is cool. All right, so another one that's again, these are all good questions. This one's pretty cool. So you're thinking about like the day of the week or roughly like working hours with the loud volumes of internet noise. Like, do y'all think through that or look at certain ASNs and others as an example, that certain hours we have higher volumes of traffic, which might talk to like the working group of operators and similars in those countries. And
Yeah.
actually,
So,
real quick, the way I would interpret that and kind of think about it too is as people are masking where they're hopping through, you should still be able to do some timeline analysis of kind of when
yeah.
they're active and correlated to like the UTCs they're out of.
Yeah, so our researchers now do that. I wasn't smart enough to realize that that was something that you could do. Our researchers now do that. As a general rule, a lot of what we see is like massively automated, and so it doesn't the code doesn't care when it's running
Yeah.
or while it's running. But that said, we do still find some patterns in things that are exclusively occurring throughout a certain time window. We can see people's cron jobs firing whenever it's kind of like their midnight, and we know they're about where the system is located. But as a general rule, like I can't tell you that we've ever done anything like really groundbreakingly cool on that. But our research
I
team
think
now
you're
actually pays attention to that.
Yeah, I think you might be undervaluing that. I think some of that is groundbreaking of like doing that analysis. But yeah, all right. But yeah, you might want to. Yeah, it's interesting. So next one is another kind of fun one from your friend Hector here on. Y'all obviously doing some cool research and obviously have value to a number of companies. Have you seen anybody kind of come back after y'all? Have you seen like DDoSs against servers or something? Which to some degree
Yeah,
I'd imagine is very difficult because you don't exactly know where your stuff is. But what
no,
have you
that's
seen against your services and similar?
yeah. So God, I could talk about this for a while. So we've seen people DDoS some of our data services. People have DDoSed our APIs. People have DDoSed our websites. Nobody knows where our collector nodes are. That's like a kind of trade secret. It's part of our whole spiel. Also, even if you do find them, like we can rotate them. Like, I mean, we rotate them constantly. We have a bounty on identifying our data services. And if you do identify our data service, like if you identify where our nodes are, like consistently and reach out to us and prove it, we'll pay you. That happened with one of our researchers recently, and then we paid him, and then we just hired him. But so like we have had people do this before. We've even had people give us shouts out in the user agents that they've used while they were crawling the internet. But it wasn't mean. It was like someone scanned the internet or they crawled the internet and they set the user agent that they had to like research, like security research only, don't at me GreyNoise. And I was like, we made it. Like we actually did it. We made it.
That's a good feeling. It's like I remember, I forget what group did this, but it was like a malware author, and he put in some stuff like uh, just trolling. I think it was like FireEye or something right in the code, and I'm like, you
Yeah,
did it.
yeah, yeah.
You got their
It
attention. Like,
feels good. It
congratulations.
feels
Yeah,
good when that finally happens. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. All right. Can you shed some light on the spoofed tag? And wouldn't, if the IP is spoofed, wouldn't that inadvertently make it malicious either way? So how do you think through that of like if it's spoofed versus not malicious, and kind of just how you're doing that tagging or what you think about that tagging?
Yeah, so like I hate our own phrasing of it, like because people ask us this a lot. We can never confirm with 100% that something's spoofed because this is like an unsolved problem in like computer networking, generally speaking. What we do is what spoofed or what spoofable means on our web interface is that just means a three-way handshake has not been completed. A TCP three-way handshake has not been completed, which means
Gotcha.
technically anybody could have sent this. And so it doesn't by default make it malicious because we don't actually know who sent it. We have no idea.
Yeah, but
So
that's
there's some
that's
tricks that we
reasonable.
can, yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I think there's a little bit of lag there. Yeah, that's super reasonable though.
Yeah,
Okay.
and so the way that I think about the spoofable flag is like all we're trying to do is tell our users whether or not the IP address that we're reporting on has actually completed a three-way handshake. Because if it hasn't, it's still technically spoofable. But if it has, it can't be spoofed. It's
Yeah.
impossible for that to have been spoofed, right?
All right, perfect. So let's get into like a couple like commercial like questions of like people obviously wanting to buy and thinking through it. And so I'll throw these at you as well. Um,
Sure. Yeah.
uh, one folks has like a very large Splunk deployment, and they're not sure the
Mhm.
API would work for them. Like, what other kind of approaches do you support? Do you support other approaches like delivering the data to clients like that?
Yeah. So for the right customers under the right circumstances, we will do bulk data deliveries. We have some customers that we do that with. We just charge way more money to do that because it has like a lot of business risk. Chances
As,
are, if you're operating
also,
like
as you
a
should, by the
big,
way. Like, if you opt like
yeah,
no offense to this customer, like no offense to who I'm about to troll on here, but like I've seen your API. It's perfectly fine. Like if that's
yeah,
not
yeah. I mean,
working for you, you're large enough
we
to
handle
pay for
many,
the.
many millions. Yeah, we handle many, many millions of API requests every day. So like we can probably handle it. But look, if the concern is like we load a bunch of data into our Splunk and you're tying our value prop to how much data you're loading into your Splunk, you don't have to enrich everything that goes into your Splunk with GreyNoise as it's going in. You don't have to do that. You can install the Splunk app and you can just basically only enrich the things that you want to enrich, like via, SPL. You don't have to, you can totally get away with using the API for something like that. I
Yeah,
promise.
yeah.
If for some reason that's not the case, bulk data is on the table. We just charge a lot of money for it, and it's a nightmare to manage the bulk data. It's big,
I'm
it's
gonna jump in
noisy.
for
Yeah.
your salespeople. You don't charge a lot of money for it. You charge a fair price for the value you deliver.
Right. Yeah,
All
exactly.
right, look, there's another one here for you, but like I'm reading it and I kind of I feel like I can answer it for you almost. Where it says like, look, we use a number of threat intelligence feeds and OSINT sources. Like, which one does GreyNoise replace? But I haven't heard anything that you said that makes me think that you replace any of them. That's kind of the whole value prop is that you can use all your other threat intel feeds, and this is a completely different thing on reducing the crap that you have to deal with. And I don't know anything else like that out there. So
Yeah,
you can take a
you're
shot at that
exactly right.
question if you want, but I think that's the answer.
Literally have nothing to add. Like all we want to do is bring more value to your existing security products and your existing security services by, eliminating as many distractions as we possibly can. Like we're not replacing anything.
Yeah, and again, this is I don't know, not to shill for you here, but I don't know anything else like this. So this is very fun, and also just for everybody listening in, like I was spoken to Andrew about this before. Like the service is free to go get an account and use. Like this is something that I throw to students and in class and similar. Obviously, if you can pay for it, pay for it. If you're going to do a much more large thing for your company, obviously go with the subscription. But I love those types of tools where it's just like, hey, no pitch needed. Go use the free version, have fun, and there's no real difference either, which I thought was fun signing up for an account. Like your premium version is just the ability to use it more. You can use all the same value out of the
That's
free
exactly
version.
right. Yeah. That was
phenomenal.
that was the thinking process that I had as well. It was just basically like, look, we'll give people access to the web interface for free, and then at some point, if you get sick of copying and pasting stuff into it, you're going to want to use it in your SIM or in your SOAR product. We'll charge money for API access, but it's the same data, right? And so that's what and we have an enterprise API that we charge money for. We have a community API that just provides way less data and it's rate limited, that you can use for free. It's unauthenticated. You don't even have to talk to us to use that.
So while those other companies tell you what to worry about, we tell you what not to worry about. GreyNoise. No more noise.